The Imperium does not want you to hear this story, not because it is heresy whispered by the servants of chaos, and not because it is a fabrication born of madness. It is forbidden because it touches a truth so dangerous that even knowledge of its existence is considered a crime. According to the vast archives of the Imperium, meticulously guarded and endlessly censored, Brother-Captain Malrec never existed. There is no record of his induction into the Adeptus, no campaign logs bearing his name, no honors, no censures, no mention of his death. In the eyes of Imperial history, he is a void, an absence where a life should have been. And yet, the Imperium does not erase what is meaningless. It erases what is threatening. Malrec was not slain by Xenos claws or torn apart by demonic horrors. He did not fall screaming beneath the guns of traitor legions. His crime was far worse than treachery. He learned something he was never meant to know. In the grim darkness of the far future, humanity is taught that the Emperor is infallible, that he is the perfect architect of mankind's survival, that every sacrifice, every war, every eradicated world is justified in his divine plan. To question this belief is to invite death. To prove it false is to invite annihilation. What Malrec discovered was not a weapon, nor a lost relic of unimaginable power. It was a truth buried beneath stone, silence, and 10,000 years of deliberate forgetting. A truth so catastrophic that the Imperium chose to erase not only the evidence, but the men who witnessed it. The Ghoul Stars are infamous among Imperial commanders. A region where fleets vanish, astropaths go mad, and entire systems are marked for quarantine without explanation. It is said that the warp behaves differently there, as if reality itself recoils from something hidden in the void. It was into this darkness that Malrec and his brothers were sent, unaware that their mission was never meant to succeed. They believed they were answering a distress call. They believed they were reclaiming a lost Imperial world. They believed they were servants of the Emperor's will. They were wrong, because some signals are not calls for help. Some worlds are not meant to be reclaimed, and some truths, once uncovered, demand that there be no survivors. What follows is not a tale of heroism in the traditional sense. There are no glorious victories here, no banners raised in triumph, only duty colliding with reality, and faith collapsing under the weight of undeniable proof. This is the story of a space marine who looked beyond the lie, a warrior who discovered that the Imperium he served was built not only on sacrifice, but on secrets too dangerous to endure. And this is why his name was erased, his deeds forgotten, and his existence denied. Because in Warhammer 40,000, death is mercy. Brother-Captain Malrec had fought across 100 war zones, yet nothing in his long service had prepared him for the summons that arrived without ceremony or explanation. The orders were brief, transmitted through encrypted channels bearing the highest level of authorization. There were no honorifics, no tactical projections, and no promises of glory. Only coordinates, a region designation, and a single directive: investigate and contain. The region was known as the Ghoul Stars among Imperial commanders. The Ghoul Stars were spoken of in lowered voices, if they were spoken of at all. Entire expeditionary fleets had vanished within its borders. Astropaths sent to probe its depths often emerged screaming, their minds fractured beyond repair. Worlds charted during the Great Crusade had gone silent, later reclassified under quarantine edicts that offered no justification. Officially, the Ghoul Stars were simply unstable. In truth, they were avoided because something about them defied understanding. Malrec studied the data during the long translation through the warp. The mission file was unusually thin. No enemy designation, no historical engagement records, no population estimates. Only a single Imperial world marked as lost during the early years of the Imperium, now inexplicably broadcasting a distress signal. The signal disturbed him. It was encoded in an archaic form of Imperial command cant, a linguistic structure abandoned millennia ago. Its cadence was rigid, precise, and unmistakably authentic. More troubling still was the temporal signature embedded within it. According to every Uzbek's reading and data analysis, the signal had been transmitted over 10,000 years earlier, and yet it continued to repeat. Perfectly preserved, such a phenomenon was impossible without intervention. Imperial technology decayed. Warp interference corrupted even the most secure transmissions. Nothing survived untouched for so long unless it was shielded, maintained, and deliberately hidden. Malrec understood what this implied, though he did not yet allow himself to articulate it. His strike force consisted of veterans, space marines who had survived campaigns that had shattered lesser warriors. They trusted Malrec implicitly. He had earned that trust through discipline, restraint, and an unyielding adherence to duty. Yet as the fleet drew closer to the Ghoul Stars, he sensed unease among them. Even gene-forged warriors were not immune to instinct, and every instinct warned that this mission was wrong. The High Command's secondary orders confirmed his suspicions. Upon arrival, Malrec was instructed to maintain vox silence beyond short-range tactical communication. Astropathic contact with the wider Imperium was forbidden. Any discoveries of a sensitive nature were to be evaluated on-site and not recorded for transmission. Should the mission encounter classified anomalies, the recommended response was immediate containment or eradication. No clarification followed. Malrec had fought long enough to recognize the language of fear disguised as authority. These were not the orders of commanders seeking victory. They were the directives of an institution attempting to control knowledge. During the final hours before planetary insertion, Malrec gathered his warriors within the strike cruiser's arming chamber. He did not embellish the mission or promise honor. He told them only what was necessary. There was a lost Imperial world. There was a signal, and there were questions that required answers. No one spoke of doubt. No one questioned the order. That was not the way of the Adeptus. But in the silence that followed, Malrec felt something shift. Faith, once absolute, had begun to strain under the weight of omission. The Emperor, they had been taught, was omniscient. His designs were flawless. Every sacrifice was necessary. Every lost world served a purpose within his grand plan. But if that were true, why was this planet erased from history? Why was its distress signal allowed to persist, calling out into the void like a wound that refused to heal? As the fleet entered the outer reaches of the system, the warp grew restless. Translation turbulence rattled the hulls of the ships. Geller fields fluctuated under invisible pressure. Astropaths reported sensations of suffocation, as though something vast and unseen pressed against their minds from beyond reality. Malrec watched the tactical displays in silence. The planet emerged from the void like a corpse drifting through space. Its orbit was stable, its atmosphere intact, and its surface bore the unmistakable patterns of Imperial urban development. This had once been a thriving world, complete with cathedrals, manufactorums, and administratum spires. There were no signs of orbital bombardment, no scars of whatever had happened here had occurred on the ground, and it had been erased with surgical precision. Auspex. Scans detected no active void shields, no defensive batteries, and no responding Vox signals beyond the ancient transmission. Life signs were minimal and irregular. Power readings flickered deep beneath the planet's surface, inconsistent with natural geothermal activity. Someone, or something, was still there, as Thunderhawks were prepared for descent. Malrec felt a growing certainty settle over him. This mission was not meant to recover a world. It was meant to ensure that whatever remained hidden there stayed buried. Yet duty demanded obedience. The Emperor had commanded humanity to endure, no matter the cost. Malrec had sworn his life to that command. But as the Thunderhawk's engines roared and the planet's blood-red clouds filled the viewport, he could not shake a single forbidden thought. If the Emperor's vision was perfect, then why did it require so much silence? The answer awaited him below. The Thunderhawk's descent through the planet's atmosphere was unlike any planetary insertion Malrec had experienced before. There was no resistance, no anti-air fire, no desperate Vox pleas from ground-based defense forces. Instead, the craft passed through layers of crimson cloud that roiled and twisted as if disturbed by its presence. Lightning flashed soundlessly within them, illuminating the skeletal outlines of ruined spires below. As the Thunderhawk broke through the cloud cover, the true scale of the devastation became clear. The city beneath them had once been a monumental testament to Imperial dominance. Grand cathedrals, crowned with shattered statues, stretched toward the sky, their towers cracked but not destroyed. Manufactorums sprawled across entire districts, their chimneys frozen in eternal silence. Administratum complexes stood intact yet lifeless, their windows dark, their entrances sealed by time and neglect. This was not a city that had been destroyed in war. It was a city that had been abandoned by reality itself. Malrec ordered a wide dispersal landing. The Thunderhawk's retro-thrusters screamed as it settled into a plaza, surrounded by toppled monuments and fractured roadways. As the ramp lowered, the oppressive stillness pressed in immediately. Even through their armor's environmental filters, the air felt wrong-stale, heavy, and faintly metallic. The strike force disembarked in perfect formation. Bolters raised, Auspex arrays scanning every angle. There was no wind, no wildlife, not even the distant echo of collapsing structures. The planet was silent in a way that felt intentional, as though sound itself had been purged. Malrec advanced toward the center of the plaza, his armored boots crushing centuries-old debris. He knelt beside the remains of a human figure partially embedded in the stone. The corpse was desiccated, its features barely recognizable, yet the uniform markings were unmistakable. Imperial, the man had not died recently. The molecular degradation suggested extreme age, yet the body had not decayed naturally. It was as though time had slowed, or been arrested entirely. At the moment of death, similar remains lay scattered throughout the plaza. Some appeared to have collapsed mid. Others were frozen in positions of panic or supplication. There were no visible wounds, no signs of violence. "Captain," one of Malrec's sergeants reported, his voice tense. No evidence of combat, no energy residue, no biological toxins detected. Malrec rose slowly. This was not the aftermath of plague or invasion. This was something far more deliberate. As they advanced deeper into the city, the signs of erasure became impossible to ignore. Imperial ocular symbols had been violently defaced, not shattered but deliberately scraped away. Statues of saints and heroes had been decapitated with surgical precision. Cathedral interiors were stripped of relics, their altars bare. Their iconography, reduced to empty stone. Someone had not merely destroyed faith here, they had removed it. The first attack came without warning. Burst of vox static erupted across Malrec's comms, sharp enough to trigger autofill. In the same instant, movement flickered at the edge of the squad's vision. Figures lurched from the shadows between buildings, once human shapes encased in rusted augmetics and broken robes. Their flesh was necrotic, their mechanical limbs warped and fused beyond standard mechanicus design. Their ocular lenses glowed with an unnatural light, and their movements were erratic, almost convulsive. These were not sanctioned constructs. They were corrupted. Malrec issued the command to engage. Bolters roared to life, their explosive rounds tearing through twisted metal and decayed flesh. Chainswords ignited, howling as they carved through advancing forms. The plaza erupted in violence, muzzle flashes illuminating the horror in strobing bursts of light. The servitors fought without strategy or fear, hurling themselves forward in suicidal waves. Some carried industrial cutting tools repurposed into weapons. Others detonated explosive charges embedded within their own bodies. The air filled with smoke, burning oil, and the acrid scent of corrupted circuitry. Then the warp made itself known. A surge of unnatural flame erupted near the squad's flank, engulfing one of Malrec's warriors. His armor's wards flared briefly before failing. The Space Marine screamed as the fire consumed him, his voice distorted and stretched by psychic interference before vanishing into static. The sound cut through. Malrec with brutal clarity. This world was not dead, it was infected. The battle ended as suddenly as it had begun. The last servitor collapsed in a heap of sparking machinery and rotting flesh. Silence returned, heavier than before. Malrec surveyed the damage. They had lost a brother. The enemy, if it could be called that, had been little more than a symptom. Whatever force had corrupted these constructs was still present, and watching, Uzbek's readings began to spike across the city. Power signatures flared and vanished beneath the surface. Structural scans revealed vast underground complexes extending far beyond the original city plans. These were not civilian shelters or manufacturing vaults. They were purpose-built installations. Malrec felt a growing certainty harden within him. This city had not been purged in a moment of desperation. It had been systematically emptied, cleansed, and sealed. The corruption above was not the cause of the disaster. It was what remained after the true work had been done. As the squad regrouped, Malrec looked toward the towering cathedral at the city's heart. Its massive doors stood ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. Uzbek's scans struggled to penetrate the depths below it, as though something interfered with their signals. That was where the truth lay, and Malrec knew, with grim certainty, that once they crossed that threshold, there would be no turning back. The cathedral's doors resisted only briefly before yielding to the strength of the Adeptus Astartes. Ancient adamantium hinges screamed in protest as they were forced open, echoing through the hollow interior like a wounded beast. Dust fell in heavy sheets from the vaulted ceiling, disturbed for the first time in millennia. Inside, the cathedral was vast and empty. Pews lay overturned, shattered by time rather than violence. Banners that once bore Imperial scripture hung in tatters, their symbols deliberately cut away. Candles sat cold and untouched upon the altar, their wax preserved in unnatural stillness. The air was thick with age, yet carried no scent of decay, as if even rot had been denied permission to exist here. Malrec stepped forward. his armor's sensors struggling to interpret the environment. Ospec's readings flickered wildly, then stabilized, then failed altogether. Something deep beneath the structure was interfering with machine logic. At the center of the cathedral floor, partially obscured by fallen debris, lay a circular seal. It bore no sigils of chaos, no Xenos markings, no Mechanicus cant. Instead, it carried a single symbol etched with meticulous precision: the Imperial Aquila, unbroken, unmarred, untouched. Malrec felt a tightening in his chest. This was no forgotten ruin. This place was still under authority. As the seal was cleared of debris, inscriptions became visible along its circumference. The text was written in High Gothic so old that even auto-translation systems hesitated before rendering it. Authorized by the Emperor. Alone, access denied to all others. Violation is treason, no. Further warnings were necessary. With a heavy, resonant clang, the seal disengaged. The floor split apart, revealing a descending platform that sank silently into the depths below. As Malrec and his remaining warriors stepped onto it, the cathedral above them vanished into darkness. Swallowed by the closing stone, the descent felt endless. The platform passed through layers of reinforced ceramite, void-hardened alloy, and psychic shielding that made Malrec's thoughts feel distant and sluggish. This was not merely a bunker. It was a prison for knowledge. When the platform finally halted, a corridor stretched before them, illuminated by pale, golden light. The architecture was unmistakably Imperial, yet wrong in subtle ways, too precise, too restrained, as if designed by a mind that valued efficiency over reverence. They advanced cautiously. The first chamber they entered stole the breath from even, gin-forged warriors.
Rows of towering stasis coffins lined the walls, each crafted from gold and adamantium, each inscribed with serial designations rather than names. Within them rested figures that resembled Space Marines, but only at a glance. They were larger, broader, their proportions closer to something mythic than human. These beings were not merely enhanced warriors, they were attempts. Malrec approached one coffin, activating its data interface. Fragmented records spilled across his visor, genetic trial logs, behavioral assessments, neural stability evaluations. Each subject was labeled not as a brother, not as a son, but as an asset. Repeated terms appeared throughout the records: instability, deviation, excessive autonomy. Malrec understood then that these warriors had not fallen in battle, they had been removed. Further chambers revealed more horrors: gene labs filled with preserved tissue samples, failed implants catalogued and sealed, training halls scarred by signs of internal conflict, Astarte-scale weapons damage, claw marks gouged into reinforced walls, bloodstains scrubbed so thoroughly they were barely detectable. This had not been a research facility alone. It had been a proving ground. As Malrec pieced together the data, a terrible realization took shape. These were not renegades or traitors. They were loyal creations that had failed to conform perfectly to expectation. Their crime was not heresy. It was imperfection. At the heart of the vault lay a final chamber, sealed behind layered psychic wards. As Malrec activated its threshold, the air itself seemed to bow under an unseen presence. The room was circular, its walls etched with symbols representing authority, command, and obedience. At its center stood a hollow projector. When Malrec activated it, the chamber filled with blinding golden light. A towering figure appeared, wreathed in radiance so intense it forced Malrec's warriors to avert their gaze. The presence was overwhelming, pressing against the mind with the weight of absolute certainty. There was no doubt. This was the Emperor of mankind. The recording began without preamble. His voice was calm, measured, devoid of emotion. He spoke not of love, nor of hope, but of necessity, of control, of survival at any cost. He described the creation of enhanced warriors not as a sacred act, but as a process, one refined through iteration and failure. He spoke of loyalty not as faith freely given, but as a variable to be engineered, tested, and enforced. Some creations, he explained, proved too independent, too capable of questioning. Such traits, while useful in isolation, posed unacceptable risk on a galactic scale. Therefore, they were erased. Their existence was classified, their achievements deleted, their worlds purged to prevent contamination of history. The Emperor's final words echoed through the chamber like a death sentence. History is a weapon. It must be sharpened, not questioned. The recording ended. Silence followed. Malrec stood motionless, the weight of the revelation crushing against everything he had ever believed. The Emperor was not merely humanity's savior, he was its architect and its censor. And Malrec now understood why this place had been sealed so completely. Because no warrior who learned this truth could ever be trusted again.
Malrec stood in the center of the vault, surrounded by the silent remnants of men who had once been considered his brothers. The weight of the revelation pressed against him like the gravity of a dead star, suffocating and inescapable. Every belief he had carried since the day he was inducted into the Adeptus Astartes, every oath sworn to the Emperor, now felt fragile, shattered by a single truth. The Imperium he had served without question was a lie constructed upon selective memory, deliberate erasure, and meticulous control. He walked among the coffins again, touching one with gloved fingers. The stasis field shimmered under his touch, reacting as though aware. He could feel the genetic imprints embedded in the bodies, the calculated failures and enforced loyalty that had been imposed on beings created to fight and die for the Emperor. These warriors had not been enemies of humanity. They had been instruments of its perfection, and those who deviated from the design had been purged. Not for treachery, not for failure in combat, but because they had been too human. The realization ignited a storm within him. For decades, Malrec had believed in the righteousness of the Imperium, the sanctity of its hierarchy, and the moral clarity of its campaigns. He had killed countless enemies, defended worlds, and bled alongside brothers who trusted him completely. Yet now he understood the price of that trust. Ignorance was survival, and knowledge was an executioner's blade. He turned to the holoprojector again, replaying the Emperor's voice, words that had cut deeper than any chainsword or bolt-around. History is a weapon. It must be sharpened, not questioned. The calm authority in that voice, the cold absence of compassion, left no room for doubt. The Emperor had not merely shaped humanity to endure, he had shaped it to obey without comprehension, and those who could not were removed entirely from existence. Malrec felt the first real tremor of doubt ripple through him. Faith, once absolute, became a question mark. Could the Emperor's vision of perfection justify the eradication of his own creations? Could he continue to serve an Imperium that punished curiosity, that sanitized history to fit an ideal? These questions had no answers within the doctrine he had been taught. They existed only in the chilling silence of the vault. And yet, even as his mind reeled, Malrec understood the imperative of action. Knowledge alone was not enough. Survival demanded secrecy. The vault's very existence had been protected for millennia. If what he had learned were to escape, the Imperium would act swiftly, and the truth would be buried again, this time with him. The walls of the chamber seemed to close in as he considered his next steps. Every instinct honed in battle screamed caution. He was a soldier, a warrior bred for obedience. But obedience to what? To the Emperor? To the Imperium? Or to the unquestionable truth that now lay before him, undeniable and dangerous? The thought itself was treasonous, yet impossible to suppress. The vault had stripped away the comforting illusion that he had served a just and infallible cause. In its place was clarity, and it was terrifying. He reviewed the genetic logs once more, each entry a testament to human ambition twisted into mechanized precision. Failed enhancements, unstable psychics, overpowered specimens, creations not deemed worthy to shape history had been purged. Malrec's visor reflected the golden light of the stasis fields, turning the vault into a hall of judgment. In every coffin lay a question without answer. What right did the Emperor have to decide who should live, who should be erased, who should remain unknown? A chill settled over him. He realized that his next act would define his soul. To continue unquestioningly would be to become complicit in the suppression of truth. To expose what he had learned would be to declare war on the very Imperium he had pledged his life to protect. And yet there was no choice. Ignorance had been the shield of humanity for 10,000 years, but now he carried knowledge as both a weapon and a curse. Malrec activated his data slate, beginning a covert recording. His voice, usually measured and commanding, carried the tremor of raw realization. If this record survives, then know that the Imperium is not built on righteousness alone. It is constructed on secrets, deletions, and the careful management of human perception. The Emperor's vision is absolute, but so too is his control. Those who see beyond the veil do not survive. As he spoke, a faint vibration ran through the chamber. The warp itself seemed to acknowledge his words. Malrec had touched the edge of a truth that was larger than any one warrior, larger than the planet itself. It resonated with the very bones of humanity, a pulse of inevitability and horror. The air shimmered, and Malrec's armor's internal systems detected fluctuations in energy readings, evidence that whatever force had maintained the vault for millennia remained active, aware of intruders.
Suddenly, movement from the shadows drew his attention. A form detached itself from the darkness, a figure in the familiar garb of a gray knight, teleporting in as if guided by the very will of the Emperor. Malrec's pulse accelerated. The mission parameters had not included this. The Inquisition was present. Witnesses were no longer tolerated. The Grey Knight's presence was silent, deliberate. No warning, no command, only observation. Malrec understood immediately. The Emperor's designs demanded the removal of any living entity that could carry this knowledge. The vault's secrets had a guardian, and its judgment would be swift and absolute. Malrec turned to the stasis coffins one last time, a final glance at the frozen expressions of those who had been denied life and legacy. Their silence pressed upon him, a testament to the uncompromising will of the Imperium. He knew that he was next. Even so, he did not flinch. The truth, once known, demanded acknowledgement. Duty had once meant obedience, now it demanded witness. The record he began would be his defiance, brief and fragile though it might be. He braced himself as the Grey Knight advanced, power sword ignited and poised. Malrec's hands gripped his bolter tightly, his armor systems preparing for combat he had never wanted but could not avoid. He understood now that in the universe of the Imperium, knowledge itself was the deadliest weapon of all. The Emperor's revelation had shattered him. It had redefined his purpose, rewritten his understanding of loyalty, and forced him to confront the impossible calculus of truth versus survival. In the vaults beneath the dead cathedral, a warrior once bound by faith now stood bound only by conscience, a conscience that would not, could not, allow the Emperor's secrets to die unspoken. And so, Malrec readied himself for the inevitable, the weight of millennia pressing upon his shoulders. Whatever awaited, the vault had already declared its judgment, and in that judgment he had glimpsed a universe governed not by justice, but by control, calculation, and the terrifying absoluteness of truth.
The silence that had settled over the vault shattered in an instant. A wave of light erupted, accompanied by the faint hum of teleportation fields. Grey Knights materialized from the warp, their ceramite armor gleaming with sanctified glyphs, their psi-blades radiating power that bent the air itself. The Inquisition had arrived, and with them came the decree that knowledge could not survive. Malrec assessed the threat instantly. These were not enemies in the traditional sense. They were executors of the Emperor's will, beings whose purpose was to eliminate not chaos nor Xenos, but any living witness to forbidden truths. His warriors tightened their formation around him, bolters raised, chainswords ignited. Yet even the bravest among them felt the psychic weight pressing down, the silent assurance of inevitable death. The first clash was swift and brutal. Bolter fire tore through the chamber, echoing off stone and metal with deafening resonance. The Grey Knights responded with precision, deflecting rounds with shields of psychic energy and striking with power swords that cleaved through even reinforced ceramite. Every movement was choreographed, a deadly dance of steel and faith. Malrec's warriors fought valiantly, yet each second emphasized the futility of resistance. They were outmatched not in skill, but in sanctioned authority. Malrec moved with purpose, leading his squad through the maze of coffins and experimental labs. Each step was a calculated risk. One misstep, one exposed flank could mean instant death. Yet even as chaos erupted around him, he could not ignore the horror that had drawn them here. The stasis coffins, the failed experiments, the purged chapters, all of it was a testament to the Emperor's absolute control. And now Malrec and his brothers were about to become part of that record. A Grey Knight leapt into their midst, psychic aura flaring, and a sergeant fell instantly beneath the weight of mental assault. Malrec fired his bolter point blank, but the warrior dissolved into light, reconstituting moments later with unerring precision. The Inquisition's executioners were not merely combatants, they were instruments of fate, their attacks designed to punish, not merely to kill. As the vault became a battlefield, the air thickened with the residue of psychic energy. Sparks flew from corrupted servitors still lying dormant among the debris, and the remnants of warp-tainted machinery responded unpredictably, amplifying the chaos. Bolts of energy ricocheted, setting off minor explosions, shaking the foundations of the vault. The clash of steel, the roar of bolters, and the silent scream of the erased echoed in a symphony of destruction that the cathedral above had never known. Malrec felt a pang of grief as another brother fell, consumed by a strike that seemed to anticipate his every movement. The Grey Knights advanced with relentless inevitability, their psychic shields impervious, their strikes surgically precise. Even his own experience, honed through centuries of battle, offered no advantage. Every action, every maneuver was countered before it could manifest. Yet Malrec did not falter. He had seen the truth. He had witnessed the Emperor's designs, the purges and the eradicated generations. The cost of obedience had been revealed, and he could no longer stand silent. His bolter spat fire, his chainsword ignited with righteous fury. Yet even as he fought, he transmitted fragments of his findings across secure encrypted channels. Every record, every revelation was encoded and set for eventual survival, hidden amidst layers of obfuscation designed to outlast the immediate carnage.
The vault itself seemed to respond to the battle. Structural supports groaned, ancient machinery flared, and shadows twisted unnaturally along walls that had once been static for millennia. Malrec recognized that the environment favored neither side directly, but amplified the stakes. The vault would protect its secrets, yet the price of survival was now clear. Only one force could emerge alive, and it would not be the one bound by loyalty to knowledge. A final confrontation came in the chamber's center. Malrec faced a Grey Knight commander whose presence exuded authority beyond mere martial skill. Their blades collided in a shower of sparks, the psychic resonance of each strike threatening to unbalance even the most disciplined minds. Malrec's chainsword screeched against the commander's force blade, and for a moment the world seemed suspended in the resonance of that clash. Every second carried the weight of 10 millennia of secrets. Malrec realized that survival here was impossible if he continued to fight conventionally. He activated the last contingency, a series of remote automated charges embedded within the vault's experimental labs. The devices were designed to seal off sections, erasing or protecting specific datasets. As the charges detonated, smoke and golden light enveloped the chamber, masking his movements. The Grey Knights advanced through the haze, sensing him but unable to pinpoint his location. The vault itself became an ally and a weapon, fragmenting the battlefield into pockets of chaos and uncertainty. Even as the battle raged, Malrec continued to broadcast fragments of his recordings. Every transmission carried the weight of revelation, the truth of the Emperor's experiments, the purged warriors, the hidden history that could not survive within official archives. He knew that these messages might be intercepted, perhaps reconstructed centuries later by those willing to seek the truth. That knowledge, more than any sword or bolter, was his legacy. Finally, exhausted, wounded, and facing inevitable death, Malrec prepared for the final act. The vault had already determined its victor. The Emperor's enforcers would ensure the Imperium remained unchallenged. Yet even as his body faltered, his mind remained unbroken. He transmitted his final words. The Imperium is not built on righteousness. It is constructed on secrecy, control, and the erasure of inconvenient truth. Those who see beyond the veil do not survive. But if this message persists, know that humanity's salvation is not the Emperor's truth. It is our choice. A final psychic blade descended. Malrec braced, the world blurred, and then the vault fell silent once more, the golden light fading into darkness.
When the echoes of battle faded, the vault returned to silence. The corpses of Grey Knights lay strewn amid the debris, though some had already begun to dematerialize, recalled by the warp to ensure that no witnesses remained. The stasis coffins, some cracked and sparking from the previous chaos, stood as monuments to the Emperor's will, a record of absolute control and the costs of deviation. Outside, the planet remained untouched by time, its crimson skies as still as death itself, giving no hint of the horrors that had transpired within. Imperial records, once updated by the survivors of Malrec's strike force, or what remained, would report nothing of this engagement. Brother-Captain Malrec, according to official documentation, never existed. His brothers, whose sacrifice had delayed the Inquisition's purge long enough to allow fragments of truth to transmit, would vanish from history as though they had never served. Planets, vaults, and secrets were scrubbed from every archive. The Imperium's narrative was restored, neat and absolute, devoid of inconvenient truths. Humanity remained ignorant, yet safe, under the blanket of enforced obedience. But the vault itself held a lingering trace of what had occurred. Hidden data caches, encrypted messages, and the faint echo of psychic broadcasts preserved the memory of Malrec's defiance. Somewhere, in the endless reaches of space and time, these fragments waited for discovery by those patient, clever, and daring enough to listen. The Imperium might erase lives, rewrite history, and command obedience, yet knowledge is a stubborn specter. Malrec understood that even if he perished, his actions had ensured that the truth might one day resurface. This truth was terrible in its clarity. The Emperor, often revered as the paragon of humanity's potential, was revealed to be something far more complex, far more terrifying. He was both creator and executioner, architect and censor. Every Space Marine, every chapter, every campaign could be traced not only to the ideals of survival and protection, but also to experimentation, purification, and eradication. Those who deviated, however slightly, were removed, not for heresy, not for rebellion, but for imperfection. Humanity's destiny was guided not solely by virtue, but by control, and obedience was enforced by calculated terror.
Malrec's final thoughts in the moments before his death reflected the paradox of existence in the Imperium. Soldiers like him were lauded for loyalty, yet punished for insight. Worlds were conquered, defended, and purged in the Emperor's name, but the greatest battles were fought not against aliens or chaos, but against knowledge itself. To see the truth was to invite annihilation. To obey blindly was to survive, yet at the cost of conscience and understanding. In this balance lay the terrifying calculus of the Imperium's survival. Power maintained through silence, loyalty forged through ignorance, and history rewritten to serve necessity.
Even the warp seemed to acknowledge this truth. Across the planet, subtle disturbances flickered in psychic space, residual echoes of the vault's ancient machinery, of stasis coffins, of the Emperor's holographic command. These echoes would fade with time, yet they were not lost. Somewhere, in the dark corridors of space, fragments of knowledge survived, awaiting those who dared to seek what the Imperium tried so desperately to erase. In the final analysis, Malrec's story is not one of heroism in the conventional sense. There is no triumph, no banners raised, no victories to celebrate. His courage was intellectual, spiritual, and moral. He challenged what he had been taught, bore witness to the hidden mechanisms of power, and attempted to preserve the truth against overwhelming odds. His legacy was the acknowledgement that in the grim darkness of the far future, the deadliest adversary is not chaos, not aliens, not the void itself, but the unflinching, immutable weight of truth. And the Imperium, in its infinite reach, will always ensure that the truth is managed, controlled, and, if necessary, obliterated. This is the universe in which humanity lives, a galaxy where survival is guaranteed only through obedience, where faith is enforced, and where knowledge can be fatal. In the shadow of the Emperor's will, even the most steadfast warrior may find that understanding the full scope of reality is a burden heavier than any bolter round or chainsword strike. The history of the Imperium is not merely written, it is curated, censored, and manipulated, a testament to the perfection of control and the horror of erasure. Malrec's final transmission, encrypted and fragmented across light years, remains a symbol of defiance. It carries with it the memory of the erased, the fallen, and the suppressed. It is a whisper in the void, faint but persistent, awaiting those who might one day reconstruct the truth. For now, the Imperium endures, absolute and unchallenged. Humanity marches onward, shielded by obedience, yet blind to the machinery that guides its destiny. And somewhere, in the deep corridors of this dead planet and the silent vaults beneath its cathedral, the question remains: if the Imperium can erase men and chapters from history, then what else lies buried? What truths remain hidden from the billions of souls who call themselves its citizens? In the Warhammer 40,000 universe, the greatest horror is not chaos. It is not alien invasion, nor even the corruption of the warp. It is the truth.